Hey guys, tonight we're going all the way back to the winding stone streets of 15th century Florence, where a boy named Amerigo is about to enter the world not with a bang, but with the quiet shuffle of parchment and the distant sound of market stalls. You're surrounded by soft candlelight, the scratch of a quill, and the scent of old wool cloaks. Outside, somewhere near the Arno River, someone is shouting over the price of dried figs. But inside the Vespucci household, it's all hushed voices and muffled steps. A baby's been born. His name, Amerigo. He won't swing a sword. He won't lead an empire. He'll barely even command a ship. And yet his name will end up stretched across 2 entire continents. You probably won't survive this career path. Not unless you enjoy meticulous paperwork, lifelong ambiguity, and dying just before the world figures out you mattered. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Always fun to see which corner of the world we're snoozing in together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the heart of Florence in the year 1454. The streets are narrow, the walls stained with history, and the air smells like cured meat and baked clay. You're here to meet a newborn Amerigo Vespucci, wrapped in linen and barely making a fuss. His family is respected, if not wildly wealthy. His father, Nostalgio, works in the Florentine government, a position with more paperwork than prestige. But the family knows people. The Vespucci name opens doors. You grow up in a house where books aren't just furniture, they're tools. Young Amerigo doesn't chase chickens in the street like some of the other boys. He listens, he reads. He stares too long at maps that aren't very accurate. His uncle Giorgio, a Dominican friar, tutors him in Latin, astronomy, and the art of calculating just about anything using nothing but stars, ropes, and clever guesses. Historians still argue whether Amerigo was genuinely brilliant or just very good at repeating what cleverer men told him. But either way, by the time you're 12, you know your way around a quadrant, a ledger, and the dusty corners of classical geography. You don't dream of castles or kingdoms. You dream of coastlines that might not be on any chart yet. Florence is buzzing in those days. The Medici family rules not with crowns, but with banking ledgers and silk-lined threats. You see artists sketching saints with too much muscle definition. You overhear whispers of a strange Genoese sailor who thinks he can cross the Western Ocean to reach the East. It's a world of ambition, carefully disguised behind manners and marble. And Amerigo, he's not yet a sailor, he's not yet an explorer, but he is, by all accounts, deeply curious. He watches the horizon as if something's waiting just beyond it. And though his early life is quiet schooling, small jobs, family dinners where politics are discussed in hushed tones, there's a restlessness that builds beneath his careful exterior. One fringe detail often overlooked: Amerigo may have had a mild stutter in his youth. It's mentioned only once, in a letter that could just as easily be exaggerating, but the idea lingers. Imagine him, nervous in crowds, but eloquent on paper. A boy who struggles to speak aloud, but fills journals with crisp, flowing prose. You grow into a man not by swinging a sword, but by managing someone else's warehouse. Around you, Florence continues its golden age. Michelangelo is carving muscles. Into marble, Botticelli paints women with no eyebrows. And Amerigo Vespucci He gets a job managing cargo for Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, the less famous cousin of the famous Medici. It's the kind of job that bores ambitious men and seduces the quietly obsessive. You keep records. You count barrels. You handle letters stamped with wax seals from Portugal, Seville, the Canary Islands. You track the movement of goods butts secretly. You're more interested in the men moving them. Sailors come through with sunburnt faces, and tales of floating islands, impossible storms, and spices that smell like money. So far, Amerigo's done nothing history-worthy, but you can feel something shifting. The ledgers begin to feel less like a cage and more like a launching point. Every crate of pepper, every bolt of silk, carries a story, and you're starting to think those stories might be worth chasing. You still don't own a ship. You've never even been far from Florence, but your name is already scribbled on documents passing through hands across the Mediterranean. And one day, without much ceremony, your employer asks if you'd like to help manage operations in Seville, Spain. You say yes. Not because you crave the sea, but because the maps on your desk are starting to feel too small. Asterisk, you pack your things with the precision of a man who's used to cataloguing others' cargo. A few shirts, a decent pair of boots, some books on astronomy, nothing that would suggest you're about to inch your way into history. You leave Florence quietly, no fanfare, no parade, just a nod to the Vespucci household and a promise to send letters. The road to Seville is long, dusty, and lined with travelers who speak faster than you'd like. Seville in the late 1480s is loud, really loud. You step off your carriage and into a swirl of fishmongers, horse hooves, beggars, tax collectors, and spice traders shouting at each other in Spanish, Portuguese, and languages you can't place. The port smells like seawater, oranges, and the kind of ambition that turns men into corpses or legends, sometimes both. You're not here to sail. Not yet. You're here to work in the Seville branch of the Medici trading house. Your job is books, both the financial kind and the leather-bound kind that no one seems to return. You manage goods coming in from Lisbon and the Azores, keep track of ships going out toward Guinea and Cape Verde, but your desk is slowly being overtaken by maps, letters from sailors, and increasingly dog-eared copies of Ptolemy's Geographia. You're fascinated by the idea that the world might not be entirely accounted for, that there might be lands beyond the borders of known coastlines, that maybe the earth is a little less obedient than your school books, said that. This is also where you begin crossing paths, indirectly, with a man named Christopher Columbus. He's already making noise in the Spanish court, trying to convince anyone who will listen that he can sail west to reach the Indies. You hear stories about him in the taverns, how he carries a globe under his arm, how he wildly underestimates the circumference of the earth, how his hair is prematurely white. You're curious, but cautious. Columbus is either a genius or a man with a death wish, or both. Back at your office, a new pattern is emerging. More ships are returning from strange places. The cargo lists grow weirder. Feathers, beans that make a bitter black, drink, unfamiliar fruits that rot too quickly, stories that don't quite match the maps. You start writing letters. Not business ones, personal ones. You want to know more. You want first-hand accounts. You begin corresponding with pilots, sailors, even a few friars who've set foot in what they call the Indies. Some write back with shaky handwriting. Some draw crude coastlines. Some insist they saw cities of gold, though none can agree on where. Here's the odd part. Despite your rising obsession with exploration, you're still not on a ship. You keep your feet dry, your desk tidy, and your telescope pointed at the stars instead of the horizon. You spend more time reading about places than visiting them. You'd be what today we'd call a very intense hobbyist. Historians still argue whether Amerigo was actually invited on his first voyage or whether he begged to go. Some suggest he was sent to investigate fraud among the provisioning merchants. Others say he finally convinced his employer to let him accompany a fleet headed west. Whatever the case, the books weren't enough anymore. Something shifts. You start frequenting the docks, not as a merchant, just as an observer. You listen to the sailors curse the weight of their barrels and laugh about the fish with human faces that someone swore they saw. You learn to spot the captains who are desperate. For a crew, you study the sails, the rigging, the rhythm of loading and unloading. A fringe detail from one account suggests that you began drawing maps before you ever left port, purely from hearsay and second-hand tales. They weren't very accurate, but they were oddly poetic. Your friends think you've gone slightly mad, or at least become unusually distracted. You talk about tides now. You measure shadows at noon. You quote ancient geographers over dinner. Someone jokes that you're preparing to leave Earth entirely. You don't correct them, and then one day, the invitation or opportunity or loophole comes. A voyage is being planned. A fleet bound for the New World, though no one can say precisely what that means. You're offered a place in it as a captain, not even a pilot, but as an observer, a participant, a man with just enough clout and curiosity to be tolerated on board. You say yes, and just like that, after years of ledgers, maps, and second-hand tales, you're finally on a ship. The water beneath your feet feels both thrilling and deeply wrong. You've spent your whole life counting crates and reading about stars. Now the stars are above you, indifferent and sharp, and the crates creak ominously every time the ship pitches. Your sea legs are imaginary. Your stomach is skeptical. But you're here. You, Amerigo Vespucci, former office clerk, occasional map doodler, and professional listener, finally headed west. The ocean is a kind of madness. At night, it swallows sound. During the day, it mocks your sense of direction. You learn very quickly that sailing west isn't the smooth glide you imagined from behind your tidy Seville desk. The ship is loud. It leaks in places you were told not to worry about. The sailors are colorful in their speech and remarkably inventive in their complaints. You don't sleep much the first week. The hammock tries to buck you like a mule. Everything smells faintly of salt, wet rope, and dried cod. But the stars. You look up and see constellations, you know, but they're tilted, somehow off-kilter, like the sky itself has begun to wobble. And then, one night, you spot something new, a star pattern no Florentine schoolmaster ever taught you. You feel, for the first time, the disorienting wonder of being somewhere humans haven't fully mapped. Historians still argue which exact voyage this was, whether it was the 1497 expedition sponsored by Portugal or the Spanish voyage a year later. Your own letters contradict each other. Either you're remembering things badly or you're embellishing. Honestly, both are likely. But what matters is this: you are now, at last, seeing the so-called Indies with your own eyes. You step ashore on a stretch of tropical coastline. The sand is hot and pale. The vegetation looms like it's trying to reclaim the beach. You're greeted not with fanfare, but with silence. Then, cautiously, with people curious, wary, painted. You don't understand their language. They don't understand yours. But there are gestures, smiles, and, eventually, trade. You note everything: the color of the birds, the number of canoes, the texture of the bark on an unfamiliar tree. One sailor offers beads in exchange for a parrot. Another trades a broken comb for a gourd of something that tastes like very bitter chocolate. You sketch, you question, you write, and then comes the first jolt. These people, the ones you're meeting in the steaming shade of palm trees, they don't look like any Indian you've ever read about. You keep that thought quiet for now. As the days pass, you and the crew move along the coast, anchoring near rivers, sending out small parties, gathering curiosities. One village presents you with something that looks like dried human fingers tied with twine. You politely pretend not to notice. Another offers cassava bread flat, dry, oddly filling. You taste it and imagine future snack bars in Portuguese ports, though the branding could use work. There's one scene you never quite shake: a group of boys, maybe 8 or 9, playing some kind of game with shells and sticks. They laugh when one of them wins, and for a brief moment you realize that life here, whatever this place is, has its own rhythm, its own normal. You're not discovering anything. You're just arriving late to a party that's been going on for centuries. Still, your job is to record, not philosophize. You write letters, long winding ones. In one of them, which will later become famous and controversial, you describe these lands as a new world. You don't mean it grandly, you mean it literally. This isn't Asia. This isn't some neglected peninsula off Cathay. This is something else back on the ship. Your fellow travelers laugh at your note-taking. One jokes that you're trying to write your way into a statue. Another suggests your parchment would make better kindling than scholarship. But you persist. You have this feeling, quiet but insistent, that the maps in Europe are wrong. Not slightly wrong. Deeply, foundationally wrong. And here's the quirky bit. Despite all this first-hand observation, you're still obsessed with the stars. Each night, you take measurements, sketch constellations, argue over lunar positions. One sailor claims you charted an entire coastal arc using just a spoon, a string, and something he calls Vespucci's squint. You take it as a compliment. At one point, while the ship is moored and the crew is ashore negotiating for food, you wade waist-deep into a mangrove-fringed bay to collect shells. You come back with mud in your boots and a single conch, convinced it's a new species. It isn't, but it becomes a prized paperweight back in Seville. You return to Europe months later, sunburned, leaner, and more certain than ever that the world needs new maps. Not just corrected maps, completely reimagined ones. You don't yet know that your letters will go viral in the 1500 sense of the word. You don't yet know that a German monk will read them and decide that America has a nice ring to it. For now, you're just glad to sleep in a real bed again. Though, truth be told, it doesn't rock the way you'd gotten used to. Asterisk, you're back in Seville, and it feels smaller, not physically. Of course, it's still a noisy, tangled port full of merchants, arguing about taxes and sailors offering to sell you a monkey. But something's shifted. You've seen coastlines that don't appear on any chart. You've eaten food that no cookbook in Europe can name. You've spoken, through gestures and guesswork, with people who live in complete indifference to the Pope, the King of Spain, and the works of Ptolemy. So naturally, your first instinct is to write. You write letters to friends, colleagues, the occasional bored nobleman. Long, vivid descriptions pour out a view of mangroves and starlight, of foreign birds and friendly strangers. You're not just recording facts, you're painting them. A toucan isn't just a bird, it's a living splash of color, with a beak like a crooked dagger and eyes like a drunk philosopher. You might be embellishing, a little, maybe, but you've also started asking a dangerous question. What if this isn't Asia at all? Historians still argue whether you were the first to suspect this or just the loudest. Columbus, after all, insisted, until his death, that he had reached the Indies. But you look at the vast coastlines you traced, you study the plants, the people, the stars, and something doesn't add up. This doesn't feel like the edge of India. It feels like the center of something else. You begin drafting what will become one of the most widely read letters in Renaissance Europe, the Mundus Novus, or New World. You write it in 1501, or maybe 1503, it's fuzzy. You send it to Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, your old boss in Florence. It's equal parts travel, journal, philosophical treatise, and humble brag. And it spreads like wildfire. The printing press, bless it, is just old enough now to do some damage. Your letter is copied, printed, and reprinted in cities across Europe. People read about the new land, about its coastlines, its curious inhabitants, its endless resources. You describe naked villages with remarkable grace and very little judgment. You speak of endless rivers and stars that behave badly. And crucially, you describe the place as an entirely new continent. Now, let's be honest, you're not always modest. The Mundus Novus drips with a kind of gentle self-promotion. I alone have seen this, you suggest. I alone have begun to grasp what this means, and your readers eat it up. It's not just news, it's the hint of something bigger, something that breaks the medieval world open and lets something else leak in. You're not famous yet, but you're definitely a name. Here's the odd, slightly hilarious twist. You might not have even written all the letters that were published under your name. Some were reworded, others combined from notes. A few were likely edited by publishers eager for sales. One even includes a section where you accidentally discover cannibals, then quickly move on to discuss parrots. It's a vibe, but the tone is yours, the curiosity, the awe, the quiet wonder, and something about your phrasing sticks with people. You write not like a conqueror, but like someone grateful to have witnessed something vast. Somewhere in Saint Darday, a small town in the mountains of Lorraine, a group of German scholars and mapmakers are working on a new geography book. It's 1507, and one of them, a quiet monk named Martin Waldsimler, is especially taken with your letters. He reads your vivid descriptions. He notes your argument that these are not the Indies. He reads, again and again, your careful phrasing, a fourth part of the world. So when it comes time to label the new continent on his map, he doesn't choose Columbus. He chooses you. America, he writes, feminized in the tradition of Europa and Asia, a modest name placed gently over what is now Brazil. You don't know this yet. You're busy in Lisbon, preparing for another voyage. You haven't met Waldsimler. You haven't seen the map. You're probably still nursing a bruised rib from a crate that fell on you while supervising loading. But your name, thanks to a few poetic letters, and a monk with the printing presses, now drifting out across classrooms, libraries, and sea, charts, quietly, permanently, and the kicker, you won't even find out. You're standing at the edge of another dock, squinting into the morning haze, trying not to think about the number of things that can go wrong at sea. Your boots are already damp. The ropes creak overhead. You've signed on for another voyage. Time with clearer objectives, slightly better maps, and a growing reputation as someone who writes about all this, with a kind of sleepy wisdom that scholars find irresistible. But you still don't command the ship. You're not the captain. You're a learned passenger, a navigator's helper, a cosmographer in a time when that word can mean anything from stargazer to sea chart doodler. You carry a quadrant, some patched-together maps, and a growing certainty that the world is rearranging itself under your feet. This voyage, your second or third, depending on which account you believe, takes you far down the South American coastline. The wind is unpredictable. The water shifts color from jade to ink. You pass unfamiliar estuaries, watch jaguars pad through the brush from a safe distance, and wonder again, why does none of this look remotely like India? Historians still argue about the accuracy of your descriptions. Some think you exaggerated the length of the coast. Others believe you misunderstood river mouths for straits. But what no one disputes is that you were fascinated obsessively by just how endless this landmass seemed. Day after day, you skirt the coastline, taking measurements, watching the stars, sketching the curvature of the earth on parchment that curls in the humidity. You note that the Southern Cross, the iconic constellation visible only from the southern hemisphere, is rising in a way you've never seen before. You record it, you marvel at it, and, somewhere below deck, you probably argue with someone about whether this proves the world is larger than anyone imagined. On land, you keep gathering details. You describe the forest as a green so dense it seems to hum. You witness a ritual involving feathers and clay. You try, awkwardly, to learn words in a language that has no written form. And you're not alone in your wonder. Sailors begin turning to you with questions. You're no longer just that guy from Seville. You're Vespucci, the one who writes, the one who listens, the one who sees more than what's in front of him. You've developed an eye for details that make others shrug. You note the shape of fishing nets. You count the legs on an insect. You measure wind direction with a damp sleeve and a grimace. One sailor teases that you're going to name a mountain after your dinner if you don't calm down. Still, you write. One letter from this period describes the coast as so long it would take a year to sail its length. That might be a stretch. But it's also a hint here, coming to believe that this isn't just a string of islands or an edge of some larger continent. This is something entirely separate. Something whose name hasn't been decided yet. In a quieter moment, lying on your back in the sand with a compass beside you and mosquitoes orbiting like tiny, persistent satellites, you sketch a rough outline of the stars above. You compare it to older charts. You frown, you laugh. You whisper something to yourself that no one hears. Later, back on the ship, the crew is plagued with rotten water and cabin fever. Someone steals all the dried plums. A goat disappears. One sailor swears he saw a mermaid, though you suspect he was just tired and possibly concussed. But you're focused. Not on mermaids, but on land masses, on curves, on currents. On the fact that, if this is Asia, someone forgot to build the cities. You return again months later, slimmer, more tanned, and carrying another satchel full of notes. You've now seen enough coastline to suspect that what you called a new world might actually be several. You don't know yet about the North American continent. You haven't sailed into the Amazon, but you've seen enough to know that the maps are wrong. Gloriously, fundamentally wrong, and you love it. You're no longer just a merchant. You've become something else. A bridge between worlds. A man who wandered out from the ledgers and into something bigger than any spice route. You still don't know your name's been printed on a map. But something inside you senses it. This isn't just exploration, it's myth-making, and you're part of it now. Asterisk, you're back on land again, but your heart keeps rocking. That's the strange part, how the sea lingers in your bones. Even weeks after you've returned to dry soil, you find yourself swaying slightly when you stand still. You measure your footsteps as if they're degrees on a compass. And when the stars come out, your eyes instinctively scan for the Southern Cross, before remembering it's no longer above you. Seville feels different now. Familiar, yes, but smaller. The streets are tighter, the buildings closer, the wine tastes duller somehow. You settle back into your routines, the ink-stained fingers, the parchment maps curling at the corners, the gentle ache in your knees from sitting too long at the same desk. But your thoughts are still coasting along that endless, forested shoreline where parrots screamed and rivers whispered. You begin drafting new reports. These aren't the dramatic, flowery letters you sent after your first voyage. These are more technical. You write about wind patterns and sea temperatures. You really try to pinpoint your location on the old maps, but they don't quite cooperate. The lines refuse to match. The coastlines twist and shift under your pen, as if they're still being formed. One of your colleagues suggests it might be best to simply draw new maps from scratch. You laugh, and then you realize that's exactly what you're already doing. You start collaborating more closely with pilots and navigators. You share your sketches. Some dismiss you as an amateur, just another landlubber, trying to understand the sea with too much ink and not enough bruises. But others listen. One grizzled captain admits that your star charts helped him shave a day off his route to the Cape Verde Islands. Another claims your notes on coastal currents saved his ship from grounding on a hidden shoal. Historians still debate whether Amerigo Vespucci was actually skilled in navigation or simply surrounded himself with good sailors. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. You weren't a master mariner, but you were a master listener. You paid attention, and you wrote things down, accurately, repeatedly, and with just enough poetic flair to make people remember. Here's a fringe detail. You start using phrases like terra incognita in everyday speech. The neighbors think it's a nickname for your dog, but for you, it's a quiet obsession. The unknown land, not just geographically, but philosophically. What else don't we know? If the world has grown by this much already, what next? And then surprise, new voyage is proposed. Not led by you, of course, but you're invited along once again. You hesitate. Your knees are stiffer now. Your back complains more than it used to. But how can you say no? The ships are smaller this time, the crew younger. You find yourself becoming a kind of floating mentor, part navigator, part ghost of voyages past. They ask you about the parrots. You tell them about the rain that never stops. They ask you if the naked villagers were real. You respond with a story about a woman who traded you a clay pot for a piece of mirror, and who laughed like thunder when she saw her reflection for the first time. The voyage doesn't go smoothly. The weather is inconsistent. One of the ships springs a leak and has to turn back. Food runs low. A sailor breaks his arm and keeps working anyway, because no one wants to be left behind. You take measurements. You jot down notes. You argue with the stars because they're not lining up the way you expect. And that's when it happens. You make a mistake. It's small at first. Miscalculation in longitude, then a misidentified cape, then a stretch of coastline that doesn't match anything you've seen before. You revise, you correct, you panic a little. For the first time, the land feels unfamiliar in a bad way. It's not awe anymore, it's confusion. You wonder, have you gone too far? Is this another land entirely? Or are you simply tired? Back in Europe, those reading your reports begin to notice the inconsistency. They question your observations. They point out the contradictions between your first voyage and your third. You're accused softly of inventing things, of mixing up names, of being more poetic than precise. And perhaps they're not entirely wrong, but you shrug. You're not trying to create a textbook. You're trying to describe the indescribable. When you finally return to Seville, the voyage has aged you. Your joints ache. Your skin is leathery. But your satchel is full pages upon pages of thoughts, maps, questions, star positions, and names of rivers no one in Europe has ever heard of. You're not sure if you'll sail again, but you're sure of this: the world is bigger than anyone imagined, and it's changing faster than the old maps can keep up. The morning is warm, the kind of warmth that settles in your clothes and makes the ink run slightly faster from your quill. You sit at your desk in your modest quarters near the heart of Seville, surrounded by stacked papers, worn atlases, and a growing pile of correspondence from men who now begin their letters with Master Vespucci. You've become something of a celebrity in quiet, bookish circles. No one throws coins at your feet. No statues have been carved. But your letters, that one, Mundus Novus, continue to ripple across Europe. Scholars are debating you. Cartographers are adjusting coastlines because of you. Curious students are practicing your name, sounding it out carefully. A -me-ri-go. You step outside, blinking in the sun, and hear someone at the market arguing about pineapples. They've arrived in a shipment from the new Landsour, strange, and covered in armor. It's little things like this that remind you the new world is no longer a rumor. It's begun seeping into ordinary life, but the memories in your head are anything but ordinary. You find yourself drifting back to that particular shoreline, lush, endless, and vaguely sinister. There was one encounter that stands out more than the rest, a coastal village, bright with painted dwellings, where you met a chieftain who wore a necklace made entirely of fish bones and pearls. You spent hours trying to understand each other through awkward pantomimes and the universal language of hand-waving. In return for a knife, he gifted you a folded piece of bark inscribed with tiny symbols. You still have it. You don't know what it says, but you keep it in your desk, between a folded map and a shell. And then there were the parrots. So many parrots. They weren't just colorful, they were loud. One in particular followed your party for 3 days, squawking what sounded like human phrases. It drove the crew mad. You loved it. It was, in a way, the new world itself. Garrulous, chaotic, and too beautiful to fully grasp. You also remember the cannibals. Now, let's not dramatize. You didn't see anything too gruesome, just stories, hints, piles of bones arranged in ways that made certain sailors cross themselves. You wrote about it, of course, carefully, sensitively. You called it a custom of war, perhaps, or reverence for fallen enemies. You tried to frame it with the curiosity of a visitor, not the judgment of a conqueror. Historians still debate whether those stories were true, exaggerated, or simply mistranslations. You suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like everything, out there another memory creeps in. A night spent on shore, stars blazing overhead. Your boots soaked from a river crossing, your notebook open on your lap. You try to record the sounds of the forest. Not just the birds and insects, but the rhythm of it, the strange hush and swell of an ecosystem utterly indifferent to your presence. You stayed up all night by morning. You had written 6 pages of notes, drawn a rough sketch of a tree that smelled like cinnamon, and decided that no one in Europe would believe half of it anyway. Back in Seville, you've begun sending these fragments to scholars and navigators. Not all of them reply. Some do, asking for clarification. Did you really see a river that runs 2 directions? What do you mean? The moon appears wider and closer. Are you sure you weren't just sick from the cassava again? You've answer them politely, sometimes with footnotes, sometimes with jokes. You're still not famous in the way modern ears understand it, but your name appears more and more in margins, on maps, in letters, in the sleepy mutterings of young cartographers with ink-stained fingers and dreams of world-spanning atlases. One fringe tidbit. You start signing your letters more confidently now. Amerigo Vespucci, cosmographer. It's not an official title. No king bestowed it. But it fits. You've seen more of the world than most of the crowned heads of Europe. And you've managed to do it without planting flags or raising armies. You used maps and letters, and a stubborn willingness to keep asking what if. And those questions, they're starting to change how Europe sees everything. Asterisk, you're older now. The mirror doesn't lie, and neither do your knees. The ships still go out loaded with salted meat, shovels, and wide-eyed adventurers, but you no longer stand on deck. You stay in Seville, a little grayer, a little quieter, and a great deal more respected. Your quarters are cluttered with rolled maps tied in fading ribbon, astrolabes that need polishing, and ink pots in various states of ambition. You have a table by the window, and if the light is good, you can still copy a coastline without squinting. Most mornings start with a soft knock, someone bringing you a letter, a draft map, or a question about which star leads you west-southwest in early May. You're no longer a voyager. You're an oracle. Letters arrive weekly. Some are from Portugal, others from Spain's newer colonial offices. A few are from places you've never heard of, signed by people you've never met, all asking the same thing. What is this land? How wide is it? Does it connect to Asia, or is it something else entirely? You don't always know the answers, but you reply anyway. You begin to see your role changing. You're not just recording your own voyages anymore, you're interpreting others. Captains send you sketches, pilots mail notes scrawled on sailcloth. Even Columbus's surviving companions begin consulting you reluctantly, sometimes because your predictions about the stars are unnervingly accurate. Historians still argue about the extent of your influence. In these final years, some say you were little more than a respected footnote, a court-appointed cosmographer whose prime had passed. Others suggest your modest study in Seville became something like a proto-NASA control room, minus the rockets and plus a lot more. Parchment. What we do know, the Spanish crown starts paying you. King Ferdinand grudgingly. Impress names. You Piloto Mayor in 1508. It's not just a title, it's a job. Your task, train new navigators, standardize the maps, and help organize Spain's now constant stream of westward expeditions. You're suddenly the authority on how to get across an ocean without getting lost, eaten, or mutinied against. And you take it seriously. You teach star charts, You explain dead reckoning. You lecture young pilots about magnetic declination while they pretend to understand. You revise maps with a straight edge and a sharp tongue. You even design a system for filing ship logs more efficiently because you've learned, painfully, that explorers are good at discovering things and terrible at organizing their notes. One quirk you introduce, the Padron reel, a master map. All new discoveries must be copied onto it. It becomes a living document, updated constantly, locked in a chest like sacred treasure. And there, near the bottom, over a curling stretch of green coastline, someone has written the word America. You stare at it a long time the first time you see it. There's no ceremony, no trumpet, no scribe shouting your name from a balcony. Just the quiet scrape of charcoal on parchment and the knowledge that your name is now a place. You don't make a fuss, but you do update the border. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, that one day a young pilot in training asked you why the land was called America and not Columbia. You paused, adjusted your sleeve, and replied, because Columbus was looking for India. I was looking. It's unclear whether you actually said that, but it fits. Your life now moves at the speed of ink. You rarely travel, though occasionally you walk to the harbor just to smell the salt air. You keep a shell in your pocket, smooth and white, from a beach you never quite identified. You touch it absent-mindedly while dictating. Sometimes in the cool hours of the morning, you review your old notes. The paper has yellowed, the ink has faded, but your handwriting still loops with stubborn confidence. You read a line from your Mundas Novas, I have found a continent which our ancestors did not know, and smile. You didn't conquer, you didn't rule, but you noticed, you wrote it down, and the world strangely listened. The younger pilots call you Maestro Vespucci now, some with respect, some with mild impatience. You're the man they must study under before they're allowed to sail into the unknown. You lecture in a stone hall not far from the harbor, chalk in one hand, a battered star chart in the other, and an opinion on nearly everything. You've become a ritual. They come to you eager to cross oceans and return famous. You teach them how not to die in the process. You begin each session with the same sentence. The sea does not care about your plans. It quiets the room. Then you ask them what direction Polaris lies. Half answer wrong. You sigh, point at the ceiling, and tell them they're not allowed on a rowboat until they can answer correctly 3 days in a row. Some resent you, but most begin to understand. You are not here to dazzle them with tales of parrots and gold. You are here to teach them how not to fall off the map. Your appointment as Piloto Mayor means you now oversee the very heart of Spain's navigational world. Charts come across your desk, daily, some torn, some smudged, a few downright fictional. You correct them in red ink. You train your assistants to recognize when a coastline has been copied too neatly because nature is rarely tidy. You tell them to trust the stars, but always measure twice. And you start to notice something odd. Your own notes, the ones from years ago, are being quoted back to you, in lectures, in treatises, even in court documents. There's a map passed around one day among the apprentices. In the lower margin is a printed caption, Terra America, ab Americo, inventor, the land of America, discovered by Amerigo. You blink, you didn't write that, but you don't correct it. Historians still argue over whether you knew, in this final stage of your life, just how deeply your name had embedded itself into the cartographic bloodstream. There's no surviving letter where you gloat, no record of a toast raised in your honor, just increasingly detailed annotations in the margins of maps, your handwriting unmistakable, sharp but calm. You sleep less now, not from stress, but from the way memory tugs at your nights. You lie awake listening to the far-off creak of docked ships, the wind hissing through alleyways, and you drift back not to your office, but to the jungle-fringed shores of Brazil, the blinding stars over Guyana, the smell of tar and oranges on the wind. You remember the moment one of your early captains, irritated and seasick, asked why you kept measuring everything. You told him, because one day someone will ask where we were. You think about that often now, not with pride, just with quiet curiosity. Someone did ask, and somehow your name stuck to the answer. A fringe detail you chuckle about now and then. You once got lost just outside Cordoba, not on a ship, on a road you were following, a merchant's map that hadn't been updated in years. You wandered into the wrong village, lectured a shepherd about celestial navigation, and had to borrow a mule to get back. You wrote a note in your journal that evening. I can cross oceans, but not hills. Now, you keep your travels minimal. Your hips complain, your hands shake slightly. You've trained a dozen new pilots. Some of them are talented. One might even be better than you. You don't say it aloud. You review a new draft of the Part O Unreal, the master map kept under lock and key. The coastline of South America is beginning to resemble reality. The interior remains blank, labeled only with fanciful guesses. Here be giants, land of gold, unknown mountains. You grin. You know those parts are wrong, but they feel necessary. The map must reflect the limits of imagination as well as knowledge. You write a small note in the margin. Let it remain unknown until someone earns the story. There's one last thing. The sea still calls to you. Not like before, not in the reckless, eager way of youth, but in the quiet way the tide speaks. To the shore. You sit by the harbor sometimes, watching the ships come and go. You nod at the younger navigators. Some nod back, not realizing they're nodding to the reason the Western Hemisphere isn't called Columbia, and you never correct them. Asterisk, the final chapter of your seafaring days has been inked, but you're still deeply tangled in the rigging of other people's voyages. It's been years since your boots stepped on a swaying deck, yet your fingerprints are all over the routes that younger men now sail. Your mornings begin before sunrise. The air is cooler then, easier on your lungs. You wrap yourself in a worn cloak and sip something bitter coffee, maybe, or the latest botanical curiosity sent from across the ocean. You trace your fingers across an open map. Your hands are stiffer now, and sometimes the ink smudges, just because your fingers tremble, but still, you draw. You've become a quiet fixture at the Casa de la Contratación, the House of Trade. The title sounds grander than the building feels. The halls echo, the floor creaks. But here, within these stone walls, Spain's empire is shaped on vellum and plotted in degrees. You don't command fleets, but you influence them. You're the mind behind the compass. One morning, a young pilot rushes in with a crude chart of a coastline that curves like a crescent moon. He claims it's farther south than anything you've ever recorded. You study it for a long time, then nod and say, either you've found something new or something very old, wearing a different hat. They don't always get your metaphors. The crown still funds your work, though the payments arrive irregularly. You're no court favorite, too quiet, to Florentine. You don't flatter easily, but even the king knows that no ship leaves for the Indies without its pilots trained by you, or trained by someone you trained, and your name It's gone viral. Well, Renaissance viral copies of Wald-similar S1507 map have made their way to Italy, France, even England. You see it one day just once. The word America stamped across a continent not yet half known. You stare at it, half smiling, half perplexed. It doesn't look like the lands you walked. The mountains are guesses. The rivers too straight. But the idea is there. You run your hand over the parchment, not with pride, more like curiosity. A name, once a whisper, now permanently inked into the globe. And not your first name, your given name. That still makes you chuckle. Historians still argue whether this bothered you, whether you would have preferred Vespucci. But you never say, not publicly. The only surviving comment you make about the name is in a scribbled note, half legible at the edge of a weather log. They name lands like they name stars, whatever sounds good and doesn't repeat. Your health begins to falter in slow, frustrating increments. You start forgetting names, never the names of rivers or constellations, but sometimes the names of people standing right in front of you. Your hearing dulls. You stop lecturing as often, instead writing long notes for the instructors who come after you. They ask for your opinion. You offer diagrams instead. You begin working on what you call your final project, a map not of land, but of everything that isn't land. You try to chart winds, currents, weather patterns, lunar influences. You start referring to it, half-jokingly, as the map of nothing. It's a masterpiece in the making, one that, if you finish it, no one will understand for another 100 years. There's a fringe detail about your later years that few remember. You take up gardening. You grow herbs from seeds brought back by sailors. Tobacco, cassava, something that might be tomatoes. You fail more than you succeed, but the attempt gives you joy. You joke that it's easier to coax plants than pilots. In the last years of your life, your world shrinks to a few familiar rooms and a garden with stubborn soil. Yet, paradoxically, your reach expands. Your writings continue to be copied, your methods taught, your maps borrowed, refined, revised. You get letters now from people you've never met, addressing you as if you're some ancient sage. Master Amerigo, what would you name this island? Master Amerigo, is this the same star you mentioned in your voyage of 1502? You respond when you can. When you can't, you file the letters carefully. You still believe that every question deserves a place on the shelf, even if the answer hasn't arrived yet. One night, as you sit beneath a candle dim enough not to strain your eyes, you look again at that early shelver one from your first voyage. You turn it in your hand. It hasn't changed, but you have. You're no longer the merchant, seeking better trade winds. You are now the man whose name clings to half the earth. You rise later now. The sunlight through the shutters hits your eyes gently, filtered through the warped glass of your study window. The world has become quieter, more distant. The ships still leave the harbor. The bells still toll from the cathedral. Nearby, but your mornings begin with the soft rustle of parchment instead of the splash of oars. Your body is slower. Yes, but your mind still charts things. You've begun dictating a kind of memoir. Nothing formal, nothing polished. Just recollections, a series of tangled thoughts about rivers that ran to colors, constellations visible only south of the equator, and what it felt like to sleep on a beach where no maps yet pointed. You call it your book of waters. It's not really a book, more like a long letter to the future. You never expect it to be published, but some young scholar might read it one day and understand the shape of your thoughts. Not just where you went, but how it felt to go there. Your handwriting isn't what it used to be. You speak more, write less. Your nephew visits sometimes and helps transcribe. He doesn't always get the words right, but he listens. And sometimes, that's enough. On one rainy afternoon, you find yourself holding a globe. Not a real one, it's a wooden model, a gift from a visiting Italian diplomat who thought it would amuse you. It's crudely made. The equator is scratched into place. America is spelled incorrectly. But you run your fingers over the shape anyway. It's strange, isn't it? To touch a place you helped name but never saw in full. You didn't set foot on the Andes. You never crossed the Amazon. And yet your name is carved into their outline, like a ghost signature. Historians still wonder whether you ever claimed to discover anything at all. You didn't plant flags. You didn't lead fleets. You wrote letters. You made measurements. You guessed well. And somehow that was enough to shift the course of the world's imagination. Your garden grows wilder now. You've stopped pruning it into submission. You like the way the mint overgrows its planter, the way the cassava refuses to stay in neat rows. There's a small wooden bench beneath a fig tree where you sit most evenings. You hum sometimes, quietly a tune you don't remember learning. Something old, probably from Florence. You speak less of voyages these days, not because they've faded, but because they've settled. The memories are no longer sharp. They've softened like sea glass, edges worn smooth by time. You don't dream of the sea anymore. You remember it. There's a young cartographer who visits you weekly. He brings questions, half-drawn maps, news from the casa. He asks if you still think the new world is one landmass or several. You reply with a shrug and a grin. Is a tree one thing or many? He writes that down. You don't stop him. One fringe detail, a pigeon begins nesting near your study window. You name her Isabella, after the queen who once bankrolled Columbus but never once acknowledged your own letters. The bird visits daily. You toss her breadcrumbs from your plate. She leaves feathers on your maps. You let her. It's a small reminder. The world doesn't always reward the right people at the right time, but sometimes it remembers. And by now, it remembers you. Pilots still use your corrections. The Podron reel remains under lock and key, revised every month. New names are added, new islands sketched. But your original notes, faded, cracked, but legible, still hang in a locked drawer beside the latest version. No one dares throw them away. One day, without meaning to, you refer to the Western continent simply as America, as if the name had always existed. You catch yourself, you chuckle, you wonder what that monk, Waldsimler, would think of it, now his single choice of name echoing across languages and borders. He called it America once. The world kept saying it, and now you barely notice. The candle burns low. Your hands are tired. But your maps are still in order, your stars still aligned. Your name still sailing westward with the tide. Asterisk, you're no longer the only one who's seen the other side of the ocean. The docks of Seville now teem with young men who return sunburnt, fevered, changed. Their ships carry parrots, beans, tobacco, and stories, wild stories, some of which you quietly know to be true, others ... You raise an eyebrow and smile politely. It used to be that only a few dared to cross the Atlantic. Now, they do it like it's a long, dangerous commute. The edge of the world has moved west. The maps have grown cluttered. What once took weeks to debate in royal courts is now scratched in over wine by pilots fresh from the sea, and somehow your name is always there, on their lips, on their charts, in the corner of every classroom where a nervous apprentice tries to remember which way the stars spin in April. It's strange, really. You never meant to be remembered. You were just trying to understand, to write what you saw, to name what was unnamed. You never commanded armies, never claimed land, never claimed people, and yet the land now bears your name. Sometimes, in the quiet of your study, you wonder if you deserve it. You flip through your older letters, faded now, folded too many times. You pause on the ones where you tried to describe the scent of the New World forests, the taste of the fruit, the glint of obsidian in an unfamiliar sun. You tried so hard to make people see it, not just as land to take, but as something real, ancient, alive. Historians still wrestle with your legacy. Some call you an opportunist, quick to publish, slow to credit others. Some say you exaggerated your role, that you never truly discovered anything. Others argue that you were among the first Europeans to understand that these lands were not just strange edges of Arsabot, something else entirely. And then there are the maps. You see one, again newer this time, printed in Portugal. South America curves more accurately. Rivers branch where they should. And across the top, in neat black letters, sits the word America. Not hidden, not questioned, accepted. You trace it with your finger and smile. There's a visitor today, a scholar from Genoa, curious to speak with the man behind the letters. He asks you about the early voyages. You describe the canoes, carved from single trees, the way the birds would wake you before dawn, the time you got sunstroke and saw the stars while the sun was still up. He listens, wide-eyed, as if the words themselves carry heat and salt. He asks if you ever thought of returning one last time. You shake your head. You know now that the sea is for the young. You've already given it the best years of your body. But your mind, there still sails, in ink. In memory, you walk with a cane now. The garden path has become uneven, and the mint insists on taking over everything. You let it. You sit beside the fig tree and let the sun warm your bones. Some days, your mind drifts, not with confusion, but with the wide-eyed wandering that first sent you west. You think of that first glimpse land rising from the sea like a mirage, birds circling overhead, the way everyone on board fell suddenly, reverently, quiet. You think of the people who met you on the shore, who watched you watching them, and you think of how, in all your measurements and musings, you truly tried to record their world without flattening it. One fringe story you still recall with an embarrassed grin. On your third voyage, you mistook a pair of tree frogs for gems. You tucked them into a pouch and only realized your error when they jumped out onto the captain's lap during supper. You were not invited to dinner the next night. You include the story in your dictation, because honesty matters, because you were never a conqueror, just a curious man who got seasick and liked stars. The pigeon still visits. You toss her crumbs and speak to her in slow Italian. She doesn't care what your name is. She just knows you're gentle and still. That's how most people see you now. The old man with maps. The one who named something without meaning to. The one who turned west and didn't see gold or glory but land and sky and questions. And somehow that was enough.